What's up, everybody? Welcome, Sifters, YouTube crew, Patreon crew. Welcome to Ask Shane Anything. This is a little show where I answer your questions on a weekly basis, and this happens because a bunch of people are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/sifted. Pledge at that $7 a month tier or higher. This show's definitely going to keep happening. Obviously, you can pledge it whatever you want, and everybody gets to watch this show. It doesn't matter how much you're pledging, as long as you're hitting that $5 tier, which would be awesome. If you like this show, maybe consider heading on over there. Let's get to this week's questions. Question number 1 comes from What is Delicious? The recent news about gamers only buying 2 new games per year is not necessarily surprising to me, but I'm curious how or if you think these trends will affect how the next consoles will be designed or presented. Do you think the platform holders try to react or adapt? And if so, how? Do you think they just stay the course because they don't care where the money comes from? So what is Delicious is talking about is there was a study that was published this week that determined that the average game player, only buys 2 full-priced games per year. Now, this has sent shockwaves around the industry, but I'm sure publishers have known this for a long time. I'm sure the platform holders have known this for a long time. It's just news to us, kinda. But I feel like if you've been using Sifted, watching Game Face, watching Pactor Factor, you probably have a pretty good idea that this has already been the case, and maybe for quite a while. So the question becomes, like, what do you do about it? Well, first of all, I would love to see data to see how this has changed over time. Now, I don't have that data, so I just have to kind of guess or extrapolate based upon the knowledge that I already have. So my guess would be that number has come down pretty drastically over the last 5 to 10 years. And when I say drastically, maybe it went from 3.5 games to 2. You may say that's not a big change, but when you talk about the install base of 100 million, 150 million, that number's big. That extra 1.5 games per year across 100 million people adds up to a lot of money. So even a small change to that number perceptually is actually a big change financially for the publishers and platform holders. So my guess is that number has come down a lot, and that is because the younger generations aren't doing what we did. They're not buying the games like we did. They're not asking for games at the holidays like we did. They're not asking for new consoles at the holidays like we did. They don't look at video games as gaming. The really young generation look at games as a social opportunity, a way to interact with other people, whether you're playing the game or not. A lot of my nieces and nephews, when they play Fortnite, they don't actually play the game. They just go into a little lobby and stand in a circle and fire off emotes and chat with each other. It's a place to hang out and talk and that kind of stuff. So they're never going to leave that behind. It's like trying to get your mom and dad to stop using Facebook. It's that's how they've learned to communicate at this point, and that's what they're going to use. They're not going to go to another platform. They're not going to stop using Facebook because they're probably addicted to it. That's what kids are doing. For them, Fortnite is their Facebook, or Roblox is their Facebook. So that's the problem, is that games have transcended being video games for these younger generations. It's not just about buying a game, enjoying it, finishing it, and then moving on to the next. It's this ongoing, rolling social platform that always gets new stuff that gets them to go back and play the game for a little bit when the new stuff comes out, but ultimately it's a place for them to socialize. So, buying 2 games per year, it sucks. And you wonder, you're how does anyone stay in business in the current environment if people are only buying 2 games per year? So here's the thing, they're not counting on every one of us to keep buying 2 games per year. There's 150 million PS4 owners or whatever, and they're counting on, me to buy a couple games, someone else to buy a couple games. They're not all buying the same games. So back to your question about whether this data will impact the next wave of consoles, Gen 10 consoles, PlayStation 6, whatever the next Xbox is. Do we consider Switch 2 Gen 10? I'll have to think about that one. But anyway, the question becomes for you is, how is this going to impact what they're doing with PS6 and what they're doing with Xbox Series X? As far as the hardware itself is concerned, I don't think that's going to affect anything. As far as the specs, what GPU they're going to put in it, what CPU they're going to put in it, what's the RAM going to be like, what's the bus going to look, all that kind of stuff, I think it's going to go unaffected by people buying 1 or 2 games, because no matter what, they're going to want to make the games as appealing as possible. So And for the price point, obviously, they have to consider that when they're building the machines. But they want the games to look good to make people buy games, so maybe they buy more than 2 games per year. So as far as the physical part of the hardware, I don't think it's going to affect anything. Now, if you're talking about the hardware ecosystem, so when you're talking about PlayStation, you're talking about PlayStation Plus and all that stuff, and when you're talking about Xbox, you're talking about Xbox Live, which isn't even a thing anymore, you're talking about Game Pass and stuff like that. How will people buying 2 games a year affect that stuff? Well, I think for Microsoft, it's like, we're right. to Microsoft, it's going to be like, we were right all along. We knew people were going to stop buying games, and we've created this thing for those people. But here's the thing. I don't think that just because people stop buying full-priced games, that they're going to think that Game Pass is a good deal. Because with the recent price increases that drive it up to basically $360 per year, if these people are usually spending $150 a year on games, there's no way they're going to go almost triple that amount. It's just not going to happen. So I'm sure Microsoft is sitting there right now saying, we were right, people are stopped buying games, we knew it. Well, that doesn't mean that what you set up is going to work still. And so I don't think it will work. I don't think that Game Pass is going to have some big boom period because a bunch of people have stopped buying video games. I don't think that's going to happen. Now let's look at PlayStation. How is this going to impact PlayStation? Now, one, I will say it probably will impact PlayStation more because, let's be honest, PlayStation right now is not making all of its money off of its own games. It used to. I wouldn't say all of it, but it was making a bigger chunk of its revenue from the games that wasn't losing a cut of the money to a publisher. That's where the bread is really buttered. If you can put out a bunch of exclusives where you're not losing a cut of the money because it's made by somebody else, that's how you make a ton of your money, but that's not what PlayStation's doing. It's putting out 2 exclusives a year, roughly, at this point. So it is really counting on the sales of third-party games. That's why PlayStation was really freaking out about Call of Duty becoming an Xbox exclusive when Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard. Is because it was like, man, that's so much revenue per year just from one game that we're going to lose. So PlayStation is highly dependent on people buying games. Not just its games, every game. But here's the other thing. Even PlayStation has evolved its business. Not that it's evolved its business, the business itself has evolved. So PlayStation right now, PS5 is tracking a little bit behind PS4 as far as console sales are concerned, but that doesn't matter to PlayStation because it's making more money than ever right now because of games as a service. So here's the dichotomy. You have games as a service that are keeping people from buying new games, taking revenue away from PlayStation, but those same games as a service generate tons and tons of microtransactions. And each one of those, PlayStation makes around 30% off of. Now, as of right now, Epic has said it's not going to come after that 30% cut from the console manufacturers, which makes no sense whatsoever because it already went after Apple for it, and there's really no difference between the companies. But for whatever reason, right now, it says it's not going to come for that 30% cut. So, for right now, PlayStation is rolling in the money from every dollar that somebody spends on Fortnite or every dollar that somebody spends on Roblox. So right now, it's not that concerned that people aren't buying as many games, but it could be because if Epic comes for that 30%, then PlayStation is screwed on both sides. So I do think that probably PlayStation is the most at risk. And I realize I haven't talked about Nintendo and Switch 2 because it is kind of its own thing. Trying to compare Nintendo and what it's doing and its fans to what else is happening in the industry doesn't always work, and in this case, I think it does not. I don't really think this will have an impact on Nintendo all that much, and I think probably it will impact Sony and PlayStation the most. Okay, next up we have a question from Vincent. With Hades 2 being such a success for Supergiant, yet the studio likely wanting to try something new next, should it let another studio do more with the Hades formula, like DLC or Hades 3? We saw Motion Twin let another studio take over Dead Cells DLC while retaining creative control, and that was successful. That's a great question, Vincent. We actually kind of talked about this a little bit on Game Face this week, so you're kind of extrapolating that out to another discussion here on Ask Shane. I guess the first thing I would say is I think the question that you're really asking here is like, when is a franchise dead? So we talked about this on Game Face, and I said on Game Face that I think this is probably the last Hades, because I've played Hades 1, and I've played Hades 2, and Hades 2 is a better game in pretty much every way, and it's a great game, and probably a Game of the Year contender for this year. But I also felt like after playing Hades 2 that there weren't a lot of really new and interesting ideas in there. And having worked with the head of the studio, Greg Kasavin, he was my boss at GameSpot, and knowing Greg pretty well, he's not the type of guy to just sit there and keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I also feel like if the studio were to do that, I feel like the money would probably stop coming in. It'll be interesting to see how Hades 2 sells compared to Hades 1. I have a feeling it might sell less because, again, I think if you just look at footage of the two games, they don't look that different. But let's look at this from a broader perspective, not just with this studio in particular. Let's talk about, is it a good idea for a studio, if it grows tired of working on one of its projects, to hand it off to another studio to continue that project? Now, let's ignore the fact or the idea of whether that game will actually be financially successful or not. Let's talk about that relationship between the two studios and the IP. So, you're right. There have been indie developers that decided they didn't want to make a sequel to their own franchise, and so they farmed it out to somebody else. Now, here's the thing. You have to find the perfect partner, and it's not easy. Because when you're talking about partner, you're not talking about one person or one dude at a studio. You're talking about the whole studio. Is that whole studio going to agree with your vision? Are they going to listen to you when you tell them to make changes, or when you tell them, that's not right, this is the way we do it for this franchise, that's the way we do it? Are they going to want to have creative control? Are they going to want to try to improve the game in some way? This is all going to be sussed out in the relationship between the studio that owns the franchise and started the franchise and the one that is trying to continue it in some way. So I agree, it did work one time. I think that was kind of lightning in a bottle, though. It is a very touchy thing to take someone else's creative vision and idea and try to run with it, because even though someone may, you feel, explain their idea to you very well, and you're like, that's enough, that's all I need to continue this on, it's not. There's all these things in the creators' minds that make up what that is. And maybe they can never put it on paper or explain it to you verbally, but it's there. I do it with SIFTD all the time. There's little situations that come up every day where I am forced to look at my ideals as a business owner and what I want SIFTD to be and make a decision based on that. It's very hard to do that if you're separated. And even if you have a great line of communication and everybody's talking to each other, everyone's vibing off of each other, it's still easy for stuff to slip through the cracks and lose that magic touch that franchise has that got fans into it and buying it. That's the thing. It's very hard to transfer the magical pixie dust that studios sprinkle on their games to make them better than other games. You can't really quantify it. And that's the rub. That's the danger. Is that, yeah, you can say it's an action RPG. We can make an action RPG and the characters are the same and it looks the same, but the side quests may be different. The writing may be completely different. The characters may be handled in a different way. The characters may do stuff the fans don't think they should do. There's so many ways to screw up. So Vincent, I generally don't think it's a good idea. In the case of Hades 2 going to Hades 3, I would be more open to another studio working on DLC than Hades 3, but I think generally probably both ideas aren't a good idea for both a creative and a financial perspective. Okay, last up this week, our question comes from Kevin. Why are developers and publishers releasing games so close to each other? Who has time to play all these games? I still haven't had time to finish Chronos, Silent Hill, or Dying Light, and now Ghost of Yotei is out, which I want to prioritize. Kevin, I agree with you 1,000,000,000%. Sometimes it just feels like the industry never learns any lessons. How many more games have to be released in January, February, March, April, May, June, and sell like gangbusters before these publishers get it? This month in particular, I'm sure you guys have watched, or most of you have watched Dossier by now at this point to get the lay of the land for the releases this month. It is loaded. There are more than 10 like big budget games that are worth buying, and then there are 15 other like AA games that look pretty freaking awesome that would probably make the cut in any other month. And instead, all those games are just being sent out to die. They're going to get lost in the mosh. And so why would you not delay some of those games 2 months to January or 3 months to February and give yourself a window where you're not competing against 5 other action RPGs? It makes no sense. I mean, I get it, like particularly back in the old days when everything was packaged goods. A lot of the holiday shopping season had to do with shelf space, and they're going to clear stuff out to make room for all the hot holidays, toys, and games. That just doesn't happen anymore because of digital. There are never people standing in line to buy physical games anymore. That doesn't happen. If you make it too much of an inconvenience, people are just going to buy it digital. They're going to buy it digital anyway. So I think a big part of it used to be that the holiday shopping season was this time where the retailers rolled out the red carpet to the games industry, and it's just been put into these publishers and developers' minds that that's when you got to release a game. But it is not. It is absolutely insane to put your game up against 300 other games when 2 months later it can go up against 10 other games. I don't know what these publishers are doing. Look, they have all the data. We have some of the data, but they have it all. So I try to assume that the people working at these places are smart enough to look at data, and so maybe they know something about the October that we don't. It does feel like there was a big rush for people to announce their games for October once they realized Grand Theft Auto 6 wasn't coming out. But so what? Go to November, go to December, and like I said, go to January, the first quarter of next year. If you put out a good game, it will sell no matter when you release it. So Kevin, I agree with you 1,000%. I have no idea what these publishers are doing, but I know what they will do when their games bomb because they were stupid and they released them all in October. They will lay people off. And the people who didn't make the decision on when the game was released and instead actually made the game will lose their job, while the executives who made the decision to release the game when there are 5,000 other games coming out at the same time will keep their job and probably get a bonus. So the industry is so screwed up right now. Like, it's just, which end is up at this point? Like, if you make a good game, you get laid off. If you make a bad game, you get laid off. It doesn't matter what you do, you get laid off, and then the executives keep their jobs when they're the ones generally making the stupid decisions that cause the games to tank. They're also the ones who greenlit the games in the first place. And they keep their jobs while the people who just did their jobs lose their jobs. It's not fair. It's completely messed up. So I agree with you. It is idiotic that developers and publishers are just flocking to these 2 months of the year when there's 10 other months where their games could sell just as well if the games are actually good. Maybe they're afraid that if their games are released in a window where there aren't a bunch of other games, that they'll be more closely scrutinized and they won't get as good review scores. Who knows what's going through their minds? I'm just trying to figure out the idiocy of this whole thing. So I agree with you. There's a bunch of people who are in your position right now. But the other thing I would say too is that I kind of mentioned this in the prior question is publishers aren't expecting everybody to buy every game. They're expecting us, per data, everyone to buy 2 to 3 games per year. And then there's people like us who buy, I mean, I don't even know how many I buy, but most of the people on SIFTD probably buy 10 to 15 games a year, roughly. We're not all those people, and the publishers know that. So they know that there's some people like me who really like horror games. We're going to buy a game like Chronos. There's some people who really like Japanese games. They're going to buy some fun strategy RPG from Square Enix, or they're going to buy Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake. They need to make sure there's something for everyone. That's the most important part. You have to make sure that there's offerings for every type of player and every taste of player. That's how the industry becomes successful, not counting on every player to buy every game. So I think that's probably the most important way to answer your question is like, we don't all need to buy every game. Like, the industry can survive fine if everybody is buying 2 or 3 games a year that owns the console. They don't need to buy every one for these companies to do well. So it's a numbers game that's all based on installed base and interest and niche and data. But the bottom line is, if they keep releasing games like this, a lot of games are gonna bomb. Okay, that's it for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything right here on SIFTD Games at SIFTD.net. Again, I'm Shane Satterfield. I put the Shane in Ask Shane Anything, and you guys put the juice into SIFTD by heading to our Patreon at patreon.com/SIFTD. For $5 a month, you get all our content early. If you pledge at that $7 a month tier, that Ask Shane Anything tier, that guarantees that this keeps happening and we can keep having this awesome back and forth that I appreciate very, very much. So don't forget, sleep is for the dead. Play games instead.